Chapter 1: The Cold Feast. The chandelier above the dining table glittered like frozen stars. Crystal glasses reflected warm golden light. The marble floor shone so brightly that the guests could almost see their own reflections in it. Laughter floated through the luxurious dining room like perfume. But at the far end of the table, under the cold breath of an air conditioning vent, sat a man who seemed invisible. Arthur Blake. 65 years old, a faded grey shirt, calloused hands that looked out of place among the silk dresses and tailored suits surrounding him. The wooden chair beneath him creaked softly whenever he moved. It was the only chair in the room that wasn't upholstered. Clara had insisted on it. She said it matched his vintage style. The guests had laughed politely when she said it. Arthur simply smiled. He picked up his fork and cut into a thin slice of ham on his plate. It was cold. No one had bothered to serve him when the food was first brought out. But Arthur didn't complain. He never did. Silence had been his companion for most of his life. And tonight, that silence was about to become the most expensive mistake anyone in this room would ever make. The housewarming party was supposed to celebrate success. David Blake, Arthur's only son, had just moved into the new mansion with his wife Clara and their young son Leo. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A private garden. A garage full of imported cars. Guests from Clara's corporate circle filled the room. Executives, real estate investors, lawyers. People who measured worth by watches, cars, and the labels inside their jackets. Arthur didn't fit into that world. And Clara made sure everyone knew it. She stood near the head of the table wearing a shimmering silk dress that cost more than Arthur's first car. Her long red nails tapped lightly against a crystal wine glass. Ting. The sharp sound sliced through the chatter. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward her. Clara smiled. The kind of smile that looked beautiful from a distance but carried no warmth up close. "Everyone," she said sweetly, "thank you for coming tonight. David and I are truly grateful for your support." Polite applause. Arthur chewed his ham quietly. Clara continued. "But tonight, we also have a family announcement." The guests leaned forward. Arthur looked up slowly. He already knew what was coming. Because Clara had underestimated one thing about old electricians. They noticed details. Clara lifted her wine glass. "To ensure our family's future," she said smoothly, "David and I have made a responsible decision." She turned toward Arthur. Her smile tightened slightly. "Dad is getting older. His house in the city is old and unsafe." Arthur stared at her calmly. Clara continued as if reading from a prepared script. "So we've decided to sell it. The money will go toward Leo's education." Several guests nodded approvingly. "What a thoughtful daughter-in-law," someone whispered. Arthur noticed David staring down at his plate. His son hadn't looked at him once since dinner began. Clara raised a folder. "And for Dad's comfort, we've secured a wonderful place for him at Golden Sunset Retirement Residence. Medical care, friends his age, professional staff." More approving murmurs. Arthur swallowed slowly. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "And my opinion?" The room went still. Clara smiled again. But this time her eyes were cold. "Dad," she said softly, "at your age, managing property and finances is stressful." She slid a stack of documents across the table. "I've prepared a power of attorney so I can handle everything for you." Arthur glanced down. The signature line waited patiently at the bottom. Beside it lay a pen. Clara leaned closer. "Just sign here." Arthur looked around the table. He saw curiosity. Polite pity. Amusement. To them, he was an old man being gently pushed into retirement. A relic from another generation. No one noticed the faint scar running across Arthur's knuckles. A scar left by a 10.000-volt transformer explosion 32 years ago. No one noticed the calm in his eyes. The calm of a man who had already watched this entire scene unfold weeks ago. Arthur folded his napkin and took another bite of ham. Because sometimes silence is the loudest weapon in the room. Chapter 2: The Philosophy of the Shadows. 30 years earlier, Arthur Blake owned nothing but debt. Rain hammered the steel roof of an industrial warehouse as lightning split the night sky. Inside the building, a massive generator sparked violently. Workers had already given up trying to fix it. Too dangerous. Too complicated. But a younger Arthur climbed the ladder anyway. Water soaked through his cheap jacket as he opened the electrical panel. Inside, wires burned and twisted like angry snakes. A supervisor shouted from below, "Blake, that thing could kill you." Arthur didn't answer. He simply adjusted his gloves and kept working. Because when you're raising a 5-year-old son alone, fear becomes a luxury you can't afford. Arthur's wife had died 2 years earlier after a long illness. The hospital bills had swallowed everything they owned. Their house. Their savings. Even his old pickup truck. Arthur and his son David lived in a tiny one-room apartment above a mechanic's shop. Every night after work, Arthur would sit at the kitchen table eating dry bread while studying electrical blueprints under a flickering lamp. David slept on the couch nearby. Arthur never complained. But he listened. And one night, an old German contractor named Heinrich gave him advice that would change his life. They were sitting outside a construction site drinking cheap coffee. Heinrich pointed at a shiny sports car parked nearby. "See that?" he said. Arthur nodded. "That car belongs to a man who makes $100,000 a year, and spends $110,000. Arthur frowned. Heinrich leaned closer. "Money is not for showing off. Money is a tool for freedom." Arthur stayed quiet. Heinrich continued. "Freedom belongs to the man who controls his money, not the man who displays it." That night Arthur made a decision. He would never chase money. He would build discipline. While other workers spent their overtime pay on bars and gambling, Arthur practiced something few people understand. Small habits. Micro-discipline. He fixed his own appliances. He bought broken electrical equipment from scrap yards. Repaired them. Resold them. He walked to work instead of buying a car. He tracked every dollar in a small notebook. It wasn't glamorous. But discipline compounds like interest. In 2005, Arthur bought his first property. It was an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. Everyone called it a death trap. Cracked walls. Exposed wiring. Broken roof. Real estate agents laughed when he signed the papers. "Good luck with that junkyard," one of them said. Arthur smiled politely. Because he had seen something they hadn't. A highway blueprint pinned to the city planning office wall. A future development corridor. Arthur spent nights inside that warehouse rewiring the entire building by himself. David slept in a corner on a small mattress while his father worked. 3 years later, that same property tripled in value. Arthur sold it quietly. Then bought 2 more. Then 4. By the time David graduated college, Arthur owned 6 industrial properties. All hidden under a holding company with a peaceful name. Serenity Holdings. Arthur never told his son. Because money without discipline is poison. Chapter 3: The Web of Deceit. 6 weeks before the housewarming party, Arthur sat in a quiet cafe across the street from a glass office tower. Inside that building worked Clara Blake, senior manager at Apex Development. Ambitious, sharp, and dangerously confident. Arthur watched as Clara stepped out of a black sedan wearing high heels and a designer coat. She walked into the building like someone who believed the world already belonged to her. Arthur sipped his coffee. Then he opened the folder in front of him. Inside were copies of bank access logs, legal documents, emails. Clara had tried to forge his signature to access a savings account. The balance was only $20,000. Arthur almost laughed when he saw it. She thought that was his entire life savings. A small decoy account he kept for appearances. Arthur leaned back. "Greed," he murmured softly, "always reveals itself." What Clara didn't know was that her entire career depended on a single real estate deal. Apex Development wanted a specific piece of industrial land. A huge project. $50 million. Clara had promised the company's board she could secure the land cheaply. She told them she had inside connections. What she didn't know was that the land belonged to Serenity Holdings. And Serenity Holdings belonged to Arthur Blake. Arthur dialed a number. A calm voice answered. Sterling and Associates. Arthur spoke quietly. Tell Mr. Sterling it's Arthur. A pause. Then the lawyer himself came on the line. Arthur, good to hear from you. Arthur looked across the street at Clara's office window. It's time. Sterling chuckled. Finally. Arthur nodded slowly. Transfer the project rights. To Apex? Arthur smiled faintly. No. To a blind trust. For my grandson Leo. Sterling whistled softly. And the mansion? Arthur looked at the photo Clara had posted online that morning. Her smiling in front of the house. Caption, hard work pays off. Arthur's eyes hardened. Prepare the eviction notice. Chapter 4, The Revelation. Back in the dining room. Clara pushed the pen closer to Arthur. Sign it, Dad. Her voice carried a hint of impatience now. The car to take you to Golden Sunset arrives tomorrow morning. Arthur looked up. My things? Clara smiled. Already packed in boxes by the gate. Some guests exchanged awkward glances. David shifted uncomfortably. Arthur placed his fork on the plate. The soft clink echoed in the silent room. He turned to his son. David. David finally looked up. Arthur's voice was calm. I taught you that a man's strength is measured by how he protects his family. A pause. Tell me, who are you protecting tonight? David swallowed. Dad, Clara says it's for the best. Arthur studied his son's face. 35 years old. Yet suddenly looking like the confused 5-year-old boy who once cried after falling off his bike. Clara snapped. Enough with the emotional manipulation. She pointed at Arthur. Let's be realistic. You're an old electrician with nothing. Her voice dripped with contempt. You've outlived your usefulness. The doorbell rang. Everyone turned. The front door opened. A tall man in a dark suit walked in carrying a leather briefcase. His presence alone silenced the room. Clara's face turned pale. She recognized him instantly. The most feared corporate lawyer in the city. Mr. Sterling. He walked directly toward Arthur. Good evening, Mr. Blake. Arthur nodded. Right on time. Sterling opened his briefcase and removed several documents. The paperwork is complete. Clara stood up abruptly. What is going on? Sterling adjusted his glasses. As per Mr. Blake's instructions, Serenity Holdings has rejected Apex Development's acquisition offer. Clara blinked. Serenity, what? Sterling continued calmly. Additionally, since this property was used as collateral for a business loan associated with Serenity Holdings. He paused. And due to the discovery of forged financial documents by your daughter-in-law. The guests gasped. The bank has called in the loan. Clara's hands began shaking. What does that mean? Sterling looked at Arthur. Arthur slowly stood up from the wooden chair. His back straightened. For the first time that night, he looked like a man who owned the room. You called me a burden, Clara. He stepped forward. You said I had nothing. Arthur gestured toward the mansion. You were standing in my house. Silence crushed the room. Arthur continued. You're drinking my wine. He looked directly into Clara's eyes. And you just lost your $50 million deal. Clara whispered hoarsely. You. Arthur's voice was calm. I am Serenity Holdings. Chapter 5, The Price of Karma. The gates of the mansion closed with a heavy metallic thud. Outside, Clara stood in the rain with 2 suitcases. Her designer dress clung to her skin. The driveway lights flickered softly behind the iron gate. David stood beside her in stunned silence. Inside the mansion, Arthur sat on the living room floor playing with his grandson Leo. The boy laughed as toy cars crashed across the rug. Arthur smiled. Because in the end, money was never the goal. Freedom was. Clara's fall was swift. Apex Development terminated her contract within 48 hours. Forgery investigations followed. Her reputation collapsed. The corporate world she once ruled closed its doors. David stayed behind. Not in the mansion, but in a small apartment Arthur arranged for him. Arthur gave his son one opportunity. Start over. David began working as a junior technician on a construction site. The same job Arthur once had. Sweat. Long hours. Real life. Arthur didn't hug him that day. Some lessons require silence. Months later, David visited Arthur at the workshop where he now repaired electrical equipment for fun. "Dad," David said quietly. Arthur looked up. "Yes." David swallowed. "I understand now." Arthur studied his son's face. Then finally, he nodded. Because discipline learned through pain lasts longer than comfort handed too easily. The lesson. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Financial discipline is power. A disciplined man cannot be manipulated. And karma. Karma often arrives quietly. Sometimes wearing a suit. Sometimes carrying a legal briefcase. But when it comes, it never knocks twice. Never underestimate the quiet man at the table. He might not be speaking, because he's busy watching you dig your own grave.